Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm joined by a new friend today. Her name is Zainab and I found her on Instagram through a mutual friend. And Zainab is basically a bookstagrammer, but her content is very diverse in terms of, if you go to her page, which I'll have linked here, you'll find relationship advice and fashion advice and makeup advice and all the things that I'm not particularly good at. So welcome Zainab to this video. This is my comeback video after a really long time and I was really looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, me too. It's great to meet you and it's great to be here and it's great to be in front of a camera after so long.
Yeah, it's good. Like we had a conversation before this particular part of the video started that we're both feeling very awkward. Because I haven't done it in a while and, generally I am an awkward person. But the purpose of this video was just to talk about books because I feel like that's something I haven't done on my channel in a while. And the past couple of years have been strange, to say the least, because, our reading habits are changing and just the world around us is changing. So obviously, our lives are changing day to day. A lot of people, what I discovered were they were starting to get into books as the pandemic started. And then I found myself in a strange spot that I was reading so much before 2020, 50 books, 60 books a year. That was my average. And as soon as the pandemic started, I slowed down. So it was kind of that weird thing where my reading completely shifted. But that's what I wanted to talk to you about. That has the pandemic affected your reading in any way?
I think it definitely has. The first year, so I think 2020, I read so much more than I typically do. And I think that's because I suddenly had a whole bunch of time. I was at home and also I was stressed. So I would read to just distract myself. And I read a lot of books that were lighter, easier to read, shorter. I revisited some childhood classics because I was just like, I remember that story. What happened at the end? So I finished series that I never got to finish as a kid. And then year two, when I think the stress just caught up with me a little bit, my reading slowed down dramatically. So it went from reading so many books to reading less than half of that amount in 2021. And now in 2022, we're almost done with January and I'm only 2 books in. So I think I've slowed down even more. I've seen people posting about on Bookstagram that they've read 5 or 6 books already. And I'm just I'm still trying to process that the new year has just started. So yeah, I definitely think the pandemic has affected my reading in very strange ways.
It is strange. 2020 was weird, to say the least. And I feel like it was kind of one of those years that we were just expecting the pandemic to be over in a few months. It's fine, it's a few months. It has started, March may start to arrive, but it's okay. It'll finish by August and then August and then December and then another whole year. And so many strange things were happening that like you, I think last year was my year when I was getting back into rereading some of my favorite classics, because before that I was trying to actively distract myself. It's this new thing that we're dealing with. It's the pandemic. We don't really know what's happening, but let's try to figure it out and just read as much as we can. And then when we figured that, this is not really going anywhere, this year we're stuck in this phase. So I kind of noticed that a lot of people who read a lot slowed down because they were just this is something that we enjoy normally, right? People who read a lot, generally they just turn to books whether there's a pandemic or not. They're working, kind of fit reading into their lives. But suddenly we were faced with a situation that we're not really sure what we're supposed to do, because the thing that we enjoyed is kind of stressing us out. So I also kind of got into that mind frame where the first year I'm actively trying to distract myself and I'm taking on projects and reading Pakistani books and generally making myself miserable by forcing myself to read, because I was well, everybody's reading and I don't want to fall behind on my reading. But then I quickly realized this is not a great way to deal with stress, because I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. I'm picking up reading projects and trying to finish bad Pakistani books that I have no intention of. I would have never picked this up. But it's one of those things that I was actively trying to distract myself, and I read more, but I enjoyed it less. So last year, 2021, was one of those years where I finished 20 books, hardly made it to 20 in very, it took a while, but I enjoyed what I read because I was rereading, I was reading slowly, and it's fine because I really get caught up in a game of numbers. If you're on BookTube, Instagram, Instagram, on Goodreads. Like, it just becomes
Mm.
a race that we have to finish like 20 or 25 books. And when I slowed down and I started rereading it, like, I started really enjoying what I was reading.
Mm. I think the peer pressure aspect of the internet is something that, like, I've noticed a lot of people talk about it, and I've heard people say that they get really stressed out when they see. So I typically, in general, like, I'm a pretty avid reader, and so there's usually a stack of books that I want to get through of that sort. But I used to do like monthly roundups, like, of the books I read this month, and that was kind of a way for me to keep track of what I've read and how I felt about it. But I would notice in the comments that some people would be like, "Oh gosh, like, this is really overwhelming. How did you manage to read so many?" That sort of thing. And that was a new feeling to me because I had not been thinking about it in that way. So what I tried to do is I just didn't do the monthly wrap ups. I was like, okay, I'll post about the individual books as I want. So I just stopped doing the monthly wrap ups because I just thought that, okay, it's not productive, like, it's not making people feel great, so there's no point to doing that. And then I noticed for myself also, so last year I don't think I had a great reading year. Like, I read a couple of things that were good, but I was really busy with the rest of my life, and I was kind of just picking up books without thinking about it too much. And at the end of the year, I was just like, I read a lot of things that I didn't like that much. So one of the things that I'm trying to do this year is I'm trying to be really intentional. Like, if I'm reading a book, like, let's say I'm only going to read 10 books, I might read more, but let's say I'm only going to read 10, I want to be really sure why I decided to read that book. Because last year I read a bunch of random stuff, and then at the end of the year I was just like, I didn't like half of what I read. So if I'm not having fun, what's the point of it? So yeah, I think that, like, for example, I think a way that I experience the peer pressure is that I would see a bunch of people saying that they really like this particular book, right? I know that the genre isn't something I'm interested in. I know that I don't like books by that author. Like, I know these things, but I'll still be like, they said it's great. Maybe I should try it. So then I'll read it. And of course, like, it was pretty predictable that I didn't particularly enjoy it. And then I'm just like, oh, well, that was a lot of time and energy that I put into something that I didn't have fun with. So I'm trying to be like, it's okay. You don't have to read the same things everybody else reads. Like, you can take your time, find your own stuff.
Yeah, I think being intentional is very important, because last year, in 2021, I feel like now, because I think the pandemic has made time feel very unreal, that it's kind of like going by you really fast, but at the same time, like, it's been a couple of years since we've been dealing with,
Yeah.
virus and the pandemic and everything. So kind of time has slowed down, but at the same time, it's like, how is it 2022? Like, it
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense. Um, so yeah, I think being intentional is very important, because then you kind of can associate certain books with certain years, that, oh, I read this
Yeah.
pandemic and I kind of enjoyed it, and this is what got me through. For me, I've been just rereading classics. Like, I read Persuasion by Jane Austen once again, because I was like, I remember reading it, I didn't particularly like it, and for some reason, I don't know if it was being in that so-called honeymoon phase right after you get married, that you want to read like feel-good stories, you don't want to read anything depressing,
Yeah.
and you kind of I think you can relate to this a little bit, that you kind of want to connect to, I don't know, being that whole perception of like a happily married woman. Because
Yeah.
in Pakistani society, that's what everyone is kind of, asking you how you're feeling, like, how does it feel to be married? And it's like, it feels the same. I mean, I haven't changed as a person, like, nothing has happened
Mm.
for me. But like, I kind of wanted to be in that frame of mind where I enjoyed like these sweet love stories and these like sweet
Yeah.
books and feel good books, because everything else is kind of, stagnant, like nothing is moving. So then I
Yeah.
went back and I read Persuasion, and I really enjoyed it. And then I read like Pride and Prejudice, and I really enjoyed it. And then I read like North and South, and I really liked it. So I've been intentional, but I also read Lady Chatterley's Lover for the first time, because the curiosity got to me, and I just wanted to see what it was about. It was not a good time. It was just one of the strangest books that I've ever read. And I just, it's hailed as like a classic of sorts. And I just wanted to check it out. And I was like, why did I do this to myself? I could have done without this book. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, so in being intentional and rereading classics, but also just like immersing myself in a genre that I wasn't particularly interested in before.
Mm.
Yeah, this year the plan is to be intentional. Like, I will not read anything that's super popular, because I always am a little wary of those books anyway. Like, if someone's talking
Mm.
about, I don't know, this like Mira CT book came out last year. I was kind of reading Pakistani books, and then I saw a couple of reviews, and initially I thought I'll read it and I'll review it, but then I knew that it wasn't going to be the kind of book that I like. So I was like, I'm going to avoid reading it because I don't want to be on the internet like, you know, criticizing it constantly. Which is why like I think it's good to be intentional, because this year I'm only going to pick up books that I think I'll enjoy. And even if I like don't enjoy it, like I don't mind putting a book down if I'm like 50% done with it and I'm like, you know what,
You
I
can do that?
can do.
I can't do that. I will, like, I'll put it down and then it will keep looking at me. Like, I will keep thinking about it. It will, like, the universe does something where if I leave a book halfway, I see it everywhere. Like, it will be in an ad on my Instagram. It will be on a billboard somewhere. I don't know. Like, the book haunts me. And then I am one of those people who has to struggle through to the very end. Even if I'm not having any fun at all, I'm like, no, I have to read it. And another thing that I've seen so many people do, which is like a superpower, in my opinion, is that they are like, the books I'm reading right now, and there's like 4. And I'm like, what? My brain can only do one story at one time. Like, I can't keep track of it all. And so if I'm reading a book, let's say that I'm not having a great time at it, reading, I have to finish it before I can pick up the next one, even if I really want to read the next one, because I can't do, like, I saw this, there's this bookstagrammer I follow, and she was like, oh, my book for the weekends, my book for my commute. And she had multiple current reads. And I was like, wow, this is really impressive. I don't know how anyone can manage having these different stories for different compartments of time.
I mean, I can do 2. Like I can.
Okay.
I can't do 3 or 4. Like I've tried that, because when you start like joining these communities and you kind of want to see, you think you're brave enough to like tackle 3 or 4 books at a time, but you overwhelm yourself, and it's like I can't read 3. Like I'll have.
Mm.
So I can do 2, and one would be like a Kindle or a physical book, or the other would be an audiobook, because the audiobook would be something that like I'm doing chores and I'm cleaning and I'm ironing and I'm folding laundry and things that aren't particularly glamorous. So I want to feel like I'm doing more, because one of the things that the pandemic has also done is made us feel weirdly unproductive. So I kind of, it's kind of like a thing where I want to be more productive. So if I listen to this 2-hour, you know, essay while I'm like folding laundry, I've done something else too. So for me, it's like you do 2 at a time. Like one of them is more passive. Like it would be a book that I'm not particularly, you know, that interested in, but from time to time I can go back to the audiobook. Usually like young adult stories. Kind of, I was reading Dear Martin by Nick Stone like last month in December. I finished it, and I'm reading this, like listening to the sequel now. So I think I can do 2, but like anything more than 2 is a bit overwhelming. Like, but there will be books that I'm kind of passively reading. Like I've restarted rereading Wuthering Heights again, and then I've read like a quarter of it, and it's kind of there, but I haven't finished it yet because I wanted to take my time with it. But also like putting books down and DNFing it, so to speak, like do not finish. That's a learned behavior. Like that's something that I had to learn to do, because I was putting myself through like really, really horrible books. And it would just put me in a slump. Like I would not feel great about the book that I was reading. I would absolutely like be having a miserable time that I can't, like, oh, I don't want to read this book, but then why am I reading it? Like, why am I putting so much into it? Like, why am I doing this to myself? And I'm like making everyone else miserable around me by just talking about it. Like, you know, there is an option where you can kind of put it down. And then I realized like they're really not worth my time. Like if a book is constantly frustrating me and I'm getting angry at the characters, at the plot, and usually it's just bad writing that puts me off. Like it's a combination of like bad writing and a not great story. Because if it's badly written there and it's still a good story, like I can still push through. But if it's a badly written book with no structure, no plots, no interesting characters, and it's just generically a run-of-the-mill book that I just kind of, you know, happen to come across, I have no issues putting it down, because I'm like, I've read like 35 pages, I'm fine. Like I don't have to read this book, because you kind of can predict what will happen. Most of these books that I've been putting down have been Pakistani books, because that was a part of the thing that I was doing, that I was trying to find the one author. But yeah, it's a learned behavior. Like it comes with time, because it's just like, I don't have time to read like all of these books. Like I just have to put it down. Because I kind of value the time over the quality. Like I don't want to invest.
That sounds very logical. That sounds like the smart way to do things. Maybe I need to practice that this year, to just leave a book
Yeah,
if I don't like it.
yeah. It's
Maybe
just
that's
think of it as like if you would have like a boring conversation, like you come meet someone and you kind of seem like interesting at first, but the more you talk to them, they're like they don't really have much to say. You guys don't really connect. There's nothing to talk about. Like you
Mhm.
can't really continue that conversation with them.
And I don't know if this happens to you, but so most of the time, like in my opinion, most of the time plots are okay. Like I think it's hard for me to feel that a plot or a story idea is like truly terrible, right?
Yeah,
When the but I mean, any plot is really dependent on how well the writing is to tell you the story, right? Whatever the idea is, how well it's expressed. So when I find myself in a situation where I'm reading a book where the writing's not great, in my opinion, but the story's okay. Like most stories are, I feel you can do good things with them, right? There's so many books that are like the plot is basically nothing, but the writing is so beautiful that it extends the story in your imagination. So whenever I find a book where I feel the writing is so bad, I kind of feel like disappointed. I'm like, why? You could have done so much better. Like, and I kind of feel like I'm like I read it and I'm kind of like I wish I could talk to the author and be like, why did you do this? How did you get published? Like, what were you thinking? And also, I find myself in a situation where I'm really curious. I would love to be like a fly on the wall of that editor's meeting or like that publisher conversation where I'm like, what is the thought process here? Who did you think was going to read and enjoy this? Like, what was going on? Um, and so I find myself wishing that I had a way to like secretly dive into those conversations and see what the author was thinking, or when, especially when characters do something really ridiculous or there's a bunch of loose ends that don't get tied up.
yeah,
And what I'm specifically thinking of as I say this is there's I read a couple of like young adult fantasy novels where there's like an alternate universe and everything, but then things don't match up. Like they didn't close the loop on a lot of ideas, and I'm just like, wait, what happened to that fairy person? Like you didn't tell us what is the end of the story. So I kind of find myself feeling like I need to know more. And then I go online on those forums where people are chatting about the book and they have theories, and I'm reading the theories. And that's something that I've enjoyed. Like, I didn't necessarily enjoy the book, but I enjoyed the experience of finding the community online that was talking about the book and hearing all of their theories about the characters. And like, sometimes they have theories about actually the relationship was between these two people, but the author couldn't make it happen for this reason or whatever. And so I kind of enjoyed that experience that comes with reading too, the community aspect, the meeting people around the books, even if the books aren't great, the fact that some people are so enthusiastic about them really gets me excited. So
yeah. I mean, like the few times that I've never tried to imagine myself in a writer's position, but I have been called out for my negative reviews by authors. Like, be like doing my own thing on my YouTube channel, writing about like talking about a certain book because I invest my time in it and I am allowed to talk about it. If I didn't like it, like I'm not. But I have been like the writers have gotten in touch and they were like, you need to take that video down. And I'm like, I'm
oh
not
wow.
censoring myself for anyone. Like it's just a lot of like, and these have been unfortunately these have all been like young Pakistani writers who were kind of not happy with the way that I was talking about their books because like I will not celebrate or recommend a book that I just personally don't like, and if I see flaws with it, like I do talk about it. I'm not one of those people who are kind of like mild about the criticism, because if I see like plot holes and bad writing and a combination of things, and I'm going to talk about it. So like you kind of wonder like, I wonder what the author was thinking or the editor was thinking. But when the author is like kind of stands by their decisions, and it's just like I didn't ask, like, it's not even like I'm tagging them or I'm like sending
Oh, okay.
them, like I'm not doing anything, I'm just in my space and they somehow like find me through my Instagram.
Oh,
So those I
that's
have
a bit intense.
those situations where like I'm being told off because they're like, you need to take that video down, and I'm like, I'm not taking anything down. Like
Yeah.
it's just been a very aggressive approach because yeah, a few Pakistani books, and this has happened to a few other people who were kind of reading them at the same time that I was. And if you talk about it, like someone will, send your story to the author, and the author will like block you, like,
Mm,
or no, like they block, and it's just like a very awkward situation where like we're not being mean to you guys and your personalities, and like we're not being like we're criticizing the book. There's a
mm,
difference between like talking about the author and but if
mm.
you're commenting on their writing and their plot holes and their character developments, and then like you kind
Yeah.
of have been an avid reader, because it's not like you don't have to be a publisher or like an editor to
Oh
kind of,
yeah.
right? Like your own experience is kind of, if you see that happening. So that has happened to me, and it's just very
Wow.
unfortunate, and it's very aggressive, and it's kind of like they gaslight you into thinking that you don't really know what you're talking about. And that's not particularly a great thing, because you're like, I know what I like in a book, and clearly your book is not for everyone, and you have to be okay with the fact that not everyone's gonna like your book. Some people will like,
Yeah.
and some people will write like reviews about it, and some people will like make YouTube videos about it. Like, you just have to be open to criticism, and this is something that I feel like our particular desi industry is not used to, because they just want their book recommended, but like, you guys have to do a good job. Like, your readers can be intelligent people, so you have to cater to all
Yeah.
audiences.
So first of all, super unfortunate that you've had that experience, and it sounds like multiple times. So that is not exciting to hear, and sorry that it happened. I have never been in that scenario, but it might be because I don't I haven't read, it's not like it's a policy or anything, but it's been a while since I've read Pakistani authors. And I will say that that is maybe like a little bit of a weak point in my like reading catalog, that I haven't read too many Pakistani authors. I've read a couple of them. Back when Lahore Lit Fest, like I was in Lahore for a bit, and there was the Lahore Literary Festival was a little bit newer.
Yeah.
I was introduced to a lot of South Asian authors for the first time. Honestly, growing up, I didn't have a whole lot of exposure. I knew that there was, like, I knew some names, like I knew Kamla Shamsi was really famous,
Yeah.
and things like that. And Mohsin Hamid, of course, I knew he was really famous. But other than that, I wasn't aware of a whole lot of Pakistani authors. And so it is something that I have read less of. So it might be that I haven't reviewed them, and I haven't gotten that kind of feedback from people. But I will say that and it's easy for me to say because I'm not an author or like a large scale artist of any kind. But I feel like when you put together a work that is for public consumption, like the public that is consuming it is going to have thoughts and opinions about it. And they are your target audience, right? They are your consumer, or they are your, like, they're exactly who you made that work for. They're not, and so their opinion is perhaps the most important. Like a publisher is like commercially a publisher is very important, but a publisher is your middleman. A publisher is your facilitator to get the work to your audience. Like the publisher's opinion is kind of not that important. After the marketing is over, what's important is your audience. Yeah. So that sucks. And now I feel less excited. So someone had asked me on my Instagram to recommend like my top 10 books by Pakistani authors. And I was having a hard time of it because I have read more than 10. Thank goodness. First, I was like, have I read 10? I have read more than 10, but I didn't enjoy 10 that I would recommend to somebody. And maybe that's just my lack of experience in the area. But I found now I'm a little bit like hearing your story. I'm like, oh, do I really need to be reading more?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, right? Like, yeah, I'm in a similar situation, but somehow different, because you are kind of curious about reading more, and I'm like, I don't want to read anything. I don't want to read anything unless I write one myself, and I'm kind of, in that space where I'm like, nobody's doing it right, let me just do it. But I kind of like, after maybe reading 20 to 25 like Pakistani books in 1 year, I was like, that's it, no more. I don't have anything good to say. I will not like, I don't want, like, on the internet, like, you don't want to be known for someone who's constantly criticizing books, because then this is the kind of feedback that I start getting, that, oh, we haven't seen you on your stories in a while. Like, because I used to kind of rant about these books on my stories, and I was like, I don't want that to be my reputation, where I'm incapable of like saying good things about a book if I like it. So yeah, it's just that I'm in that situation where I just don't want to read them anymore, unless it's like highly recommended by someone whose opinions I really trust. Like, the experiment for me was not good, but like an author that I would just recommend hands down, a Pakistani author, is Bapsi Sidhwa. Like, I've read all of them, and like there's definitely like great ones and good ones, and this one's maybe not that great. Like, this is one of the weaker ones, but like I would hands down recommend Bapsi Sidhwa to just about everyone, because especially like she writes from a place of, she has a great expression, genuine experience that you say, and then she's been around for a long time, and it took me a really long time to get to her books, but like that's one author that I would just hands around. Someone's like, oh, if you're looking for something serious, read Cracking India. If you're looking for something like light and fun, go for The Crow Eaters, because that's just one that I would just recommend.
So this is so cool that you've said that, because I think a lot of people forget about Bapsi Sidhwa, right? And she doesn't come up so much anymore. I think it's been a while since she's published anything, so maybe not right at the top of like Instagram. But Bapsi Sidhwa is actually the first Pakistani author that I ever read. I was like 15 years old, and my school library had all of her work lined up on a shelf, and it sounded so different when I read the synopsis on the back. And it was separate, like I was much younger, so obviously my perception was also different. But I read, there's one called All American Brat or All American Girl. So I read that one first. I read Crow Eaters. I read Ice Candy Man. And because they were all lined up so beautifully on the library shelf. And I think accessibility is such a big part of that. So I don't know about you, but before the Lahore Lit Fest, I didn't know about Pakistani authors. I didn't know where to find them. And now that I have that awareness, and now that I'm on Instagram, and now there's a lot of that, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll check it out. But I read these reviews. Like I read, I had heard very amazing things about how great Kamala Shamsi is. So I picked up a couple of her books, and the first one I read was the newest one at the time, was Home Fire. And I personally didn't find myself like greatly enjoying it. It was one of those books where I was dragging myself through to the end. After I was done with it, I wasn't too keen on reading a whole lot more of Kamala Shamsi, but everyone was like, oh, you didn't read the right one. You have to get the right book. And I was like, what? An author I have enjoyed, a Pakistani author I've enjoyed, is Nadeem Assam. I read Maps for Lost Lovers, and I think that he has a real talent with the way he uses adjectives and the way he does descriptions. So for me, that book, while the plot is interesting and while the characters are interesting, for me, the book was a lot more just about those beautiful turns of phrase that he was kind of inserting everywhere. And I kind of just highlighted so many little bits throughout the whole book that were not necessarily relevant to the story. They were just beautiful images that he had created. So I really enjoyed that. But what else have I read?
Someone I haven't read yet. Like I've been just reading the newer ones, like the new releases and everything. I read In the Company of Strangers by Awais Khan. Didn't even get all the way through because it's again doing that thing.
I think I heard a review from you about that.
Not a great book. Just, kind of talking like, sometimes like you can tell if the author is a man or a woman, which is not a great thing because you're supposed to be like a voice in the background and you have to do your words, like let the words do the talking, right? Like I don't want to you kind of show that this is a man clearly writing about women, like not a great thing. Things like that. Like I've been just reading reviews, great, and then I go to Goodreads and it's like 4.5 stars and I'm like, this is going to be amazing. And then I'm 30 pages into the book and I'm like, am I reading the same book? I'm not really sure about that. With Kamala Shamsi, I've read 3 because it's like, oh, you're not reading the right one. So I read Cartography, first one. It's amazing. You have to read it. And I read it and I was like, it's fine.
Okay. I've also heard it's amazing.
Like, it's fine. And then one of my friends was like, you have to read Burnt Shadows. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it was better than Cartography. But again, like, it's fine. It's a 3-star book for me. And then, like, finally, I think Home Fire was the final one, which I just gave up. No, I finished it. Like, I again pushed because it was a short book, and I was like, wait, I don't want to give up on this one too soon. And it's like a short book, 4 chapters, not much going on. But then the whole twist at the end, and again, it's like I don't want to read about bomb blast, and it's just a very stereotypical narrative of Pakistan that we've seen this for some time. And Kamala Shamsi is not someone I would recommend because I don't know, like she didn't work for me. And then someone's like, oh, you should read Salt and Saffron or whatever else that is. I think I've read 3 now, and 3 are enough.
It's valid. Like you're done. Yeah.
I'm done. No, like 3 Kamala Shamsi book. I've read like whatever Mohsin Hamid had, and I was like, I'm not a fan. I've heard he's coming out with a new one, and I'm still not a fan. I'm not excited about it. It's just writing style that doesn't really click with me. But there have been authors that I've been interested in, and then I kind of read the reviews from people I trust, and I'm like, no, this is probably not. I don't want to complain about it.
I think it's so. I find myself, and I don't know if you have this thought, but I find myself being really happy and really excited that there's Pakistani authors and that there's a rise of, or an apparent rise of like people reading, and reading being like books and literature, kind of researching with young people, and people being interested in writing, and there being writing contests and programs. Like the fact that the whole industry is kind of, I feel, rejuvenating itself a little bit over the last couple of years. I'm excited about that for Pakistan. I think it's so great, because I remember being a kid in Pakistan and being really surprised that there were very few public libraries of any kind for people to access.
Yeah, for sure.
Even with those libraries, access was extremely limited. Like an average kid, not an average kid, alhamdulillah, like I have privilege, I recognize it, but I couldn't, there was no library for me to go to, right? And everyone told me, oh, there used to be a British Council library, but then there was a bomb blast, so there wasn't. There used to be this, and, you know, but there weren't libraries for me to go to. There were only used bookshops or new bookshops. And my parents had to, like, to support my love of reading, I'm astonished now at how supportive they were, because they would take me to the bookstore to find exactly what I wanted. They would help me order them online from like obscure websites because Amazon didn't deliver. It wasn't like there was easy ways to get books. So I real like it makes me excited that people want to read, that there's more bookstores, that there's, you know, curated bookstores like Now the Last Word and stuff. Like there's bookstores where people are putting an active interest. It's not just a business. So that's all really exciting to me. And I feel like it makes me want to celebrate and read Pakistani authors and like champion them. And I just have yet to fall in love with any particular thing I've read. Like I have yet to be like, oh, this is a story about more than just like heat and pan and Hira Mandi.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah, that is true.
like, and while I understand that those are common themes and they're part of our,
Or
yeah, like I don't, and it sounds bad, right? Like I understand that those are common themes in the Pakistani reality and that they are of course going to make their way into books. I just feel like I want a little bit more, and I haven't gotten that yet. I haven't gotten a character that like thrills me, you know? I haven't gotten a plot that surprises me. I feel like I can tell at the start of the book what the book is about.
yeah,
Whenever I've read.
and I haven't found a book set in Islamabad. Like every book I read, Lahore, the summer of Lahore, the breeze, the sea breeze of Karachi, and I'm like, can we please like talk about Islamabad? Like
Islamabad needs representation. Yeah.
yeah, like what is happening? Like it's so strange because I guess like that's where the publishers are, and that's what like where the industry is kind of like Islamabad's very probably has like I don't know fewer bookstores or just like the industry is probably dead in the city. There's like not much going on here, but that doesn't mean that we don't have people writing here, because like you can kind of find stories set in Islamabad, and sometimes they're just like mentioned, like you know as like there's a cursory mention or something like a random mention of Islamabad, and then you're like, I don't get it. Like that's it. एक line हमें मिलती है. Like ये क्या हो रहा है?
So I have two thoughts. Okay, so do you think that might be, and I recognize what you're saying, like I've also never heard of a book that's like particularly set in Islamabad or celebrates Islamabad. I have heard of and read books that celebrate Lahore, celebrate the vibrancy of Karachi, that kind of thing. So Islamabad, I've heard many people in like colloquial terms just refer to it as like a city where nobody really belongs there. There isn't too much culture because it was a newer city that was established. And like I've heard it very commonly said that on Eid it's empty because everybody goes to where they're actually from. And Islamabad is just like a temporary way station for a lot of people. So I think that might contribute to it, although I don't think it's valid because that way station has so many experiences and memories for so many people. But I mean, there's just no books. And then the second thing that I was thinking right now as you were speaking is I find that a lot of South Asian writing in general, Pakistani or otherwise, tends to lend itself to the like romantic usage of phrase and adjectives. So maybe it's just not that romantic to say that you were like driving through F6 or like E7 or G11, you know, like maybe those neighborhoods or those names just don't lend themselves to that romanticization the way that you always see about Lahore. Like you see that they're the old Grand Trunk Road, and you know they're always referencing like the older areas of Lahore. Maybe that romance just isn't there when you say to someone like,
I mean, yeah, I mean, yes, like maybe I agree. I mean, I don't really agree with the idea that like Islamabad, like nobody really belongs here, because like maybe that was true in the 80s, right? Like Islamabad got made in the 60s, and like in the 80s we're like, well, it's a new city, we don't know anyone, but it's been in existence for let's say over 60 years now. Like there's been generations that have been growing up. Like I was born here, and like my siblings were born here, and we were raised here, and like we don't really think of other places as our home, right? Like we think of it like as our parents' home, and our parents are from we are from Islamabad. So I don't know if like that thing is valid anymore. Like maybe 30 years ago, that's what was kind of going on.
Yeah.
But like, people are rooted here and it's expanding and it's growing and there's like, and then you're right, like it does have a certain culture of its own. Like, yes, it doesn't sound very romantic to be like talking about a straight road, like straight Margala road going from one end to the other end of Islamabad. But at the same time, there's like a beauty in the quietness and I always find it
Yeah.
like very especially when it's like rainy, because like आजकल बहुत ज़्यादा बारिश हो रही है, and it's just so nice to be outside because that's kind of what makes the city um, so nice. But also you have to recognize that the controlled nature of Islamabad, like you don't allow anything here. You're not allowed like carts and rickshaws and
Oh yeah.
trucks like that, right? So like you have to talk about in Islamabad in a way which is not just the romanticization of nature and the trees and the hiking trails
Yeah.
but also like the controlled aspect of it, because it's so like that is what makes Islamabad is because you don't get to see the real, like you drive 20 kilometers to Pindi and then you're like, oh okay, like this is a complete experience, right? Like so
Yeah.
I think that's all part of like it's not a great thing about Islamabad that it's like so it feels like sterile in a way, like it's so controlled and most of the time it's neat and tidy, but you also have to recognize that there's so many like pockets of poverty within Islam.
Yeah.
Like you drive from F6 to F7 and then there's like a whole road where this place called the French colony. I don't understand the name. We're a British colony if anything, but
Yeah.
it's the place where like all these people who don't have anywhere, like it's kind of a slum area where all the Christians live. And like Islamabad has this bit of like the good and the bad. Like it has character in the sense that this is not like a one-dimensional city. Like
Yeah. It's yeah. I
like
agree with you. There is character. I also find myself thinking, because you mentioned it, made me think like I'd also love to read a book about the middle class,
normal people.
like a book that's not so. I understand it's so important to share those narratives of the underprivileged. Totally get that, and totally down for that. Although I do question who is writing those narratives and like what is their level of relatability. Number one, but also like number two, I've also read I read some Moni Mohsen, and she has a very exaggerated sort of hyperbolic style about the upper class, right?
Yes.
That's the only book I can think of where I've read like about the upper class specifically, like about elites. And now I'm wondering like what are those books that are middle class or like those like normal average, someone like yourself, or like where you grew up in Islamabad and you recognize the city for what it is and you're not like up there with Moni Mohsen style characters where you're going to extravagant parties and things like that, and I mean maybe you are, sorry, I don't know if you're going to extravagant parties,
Yeah.
but like but at the same time you're not living in a slum area. I think that in between perspective, maybe we just need Islamabadi authors. Maybe that is the
Yeah,
like maybe that's the ticket here.
but even for like books that we've already read, like you mentioned that you haven't read much of the elite culture, but I've read it in every other Pakistani book that I've read over the last year, because it's just like there's parties and there's exaggerated parties and exaggerated drinking and exaggerated like it's like even if like first of all I'm not like one of those party goers. You're right.
I was like maybe you're going to parties too.
I'm really not. But like I know people who go there and they're normal people. Again, they enjoy a certain aspect of their lives, which is it's like they enjoy the whole party culture, but it's not like you can't talk to them or they talk down to middle class people or people like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
normal people, right? Like you have normal
Yeah.
interactions with them. And that's what like so much of our narrative is, the rich being mean to the poor and the poor just like
Yeah.
it's just like it's not an accurate representation, because you can have a kind person who is also parties and has money and is also like nice to, it's just like
Yeah.
the normalness of life. Like why can't we talk about a university student who is feeling harassed at university? Because I went to university in Islamabad and it's like it's an experience when you go through like over time, but like there's so many different kind of experiences when like everyday harassment is a thing. It won't be anything too extreme, but it'll just be like random dudes talking about you or just like little things, right? Like these are the things that we don't talk about, because if we're ever talking about serious issues, then it automatically goes to talking about really, really horrific incidents and giving graphic details of like rapes and sexual assaults. But like nobody really kind of talks about the day-to-day harassment that women face. And it's a very it's something that we've kind of started to think that this is normal.
Mm.
Hota hai. Like it's fine. Like this happens, but it's not fine, and nobody's talking about it. And
Not fine at all.
yeah, not fine at all, and nobody's really talking about it. And it's a very like it needs to be talked about in a very from a neutral point of view. This is something that we've all experienced. We just don't talk about it. So where are the stories of normal people going through this everyday harassment? Why does every story have to be super tragic or super horrific? Like what my point is,
Super, yeah, I think that's the right word. Like everything is very exaggerated, like super this, super that. Like it's unidimensional, I feel. Sometimes stories can be a little unidimensional where that is the focus, that is the theme. We're gonna keep driving it home for all 400 pages. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I get that. I
it's
get that.
like you could talk about someone going through like depression for no rhyme or reason at all. You don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't really have a trigger. It's just their surroundings. Like you could be
Yeah.
observing the news around you, and you could be going into a certain state of anxiety and depression. And it's kind of these are conversations that should be on the page. That nothing extreme has to happen to you for you to go through something.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a crisis. I think I would also just really love to, like, piggybacking off your point, I think I would love a story about like a girl goes to university, she's having trouble finding the right friend group. She, there's like she tries a couple of different friend groups. She's trying to discover who she is. I'd love to read a story just about the minutia of, because I feel that because of narratives that are very strongly aligned to one particular theme or topic, etc., like something tragic or terrorism or poverty, or like with those big kind of mega themes that like take over the story, I feel that we don't tell our everyday life stories, right? And like and I feel that we are like, I feel like Pakistani people have so many stories to tell, and there are so many stories that they're experiencing, and there are like, I feel like we kind of blur out all of that beautiful nuance and maybe get extra focused on just the theme. Here's the theme.
Yeah.
And I say we because I'm Pakistani too. Like, there's better stories here, and I feel this sense of like, it goes back to like, I feel like I want to say to the authors, like, dude, why'd you write this story? Like,
Yeah, I remember read the story. It wasn't a great book, and just this particular incident where a 16-year-old goes to a party and has an encounter, like, and then she gets pregnant on the next page, and then her mother sends her off to another part of the country, and the baby goes up for adoption, and she's a very rich person, so this all becomes very like, and it's just described in 1.5 page as like a side story. And I'm like, that needs to be a whole story in itself, because you can't say Pakistan hai, where this is suddenly like this happens and then it's okay and nobody bats an eyelid. Like a teenager gets pregnant and the mom's like, yeah, we'll just send you off to a convent near Murray and give birth there, and then we'll give up the, like, come on, it's just so unrealistic. And the thing is, like, this is, if you want to talk about this, that's a whole book right there. Like,
that's a whole book, right?
That's a whole book right there. You don't need to wrap this up into like a page and a half just to give the character like some.
I'm so curious. What book was this? I'm so curious now.
This is the book that I got yelled at for, so I'll send it to you in your DM. Yeah, it's, basically the purpose of like doing this was to give the character a backstory. Like, she struggles because of this, but like that's a whole life-changing incident if that happened to someone. Yeah. A small thing could have triggered a certain kind of depression, and it's just where are the normal stories? Where is the girl who's going to work in a very corporate environment and she's struggling to like, nobody's taking her seriously, she's young, and everyone's like, you don't know what you're talking about, and you're a girl, and she gets talked over in meetings and things like that. Like, where are those stories, right? Like, that's a great story right there, because that's something that a lot of people deal with, like adjusting at a new workplace, adjusting, like, finding work, and then the whole pressure. Like, there's so much that comes if someone was to write a story like that, because the kind of pressure, you work in a corporate environment, why don't you like find a husband there? Because everything in our society.
Oh yeah, that's a real story. That is a story that deserves to be told.
Yeah.
I think so. Okay, also very important to recognize that those who are able to write, those who are able to be published, that is a privilege in and of itself, right? That they're able to choose that as a profession, or they're able to have enough time to do it as a side thing, that they have the stability, security, etc. Then that they're able to access publishers. We know that Pakistan is not like chock full of the biggest publishers in the world.
Yeah.
there is also like, that's a whole minefield to navigate. So I recognize all of those difficulties, and I do hope that Pakistani literature becomes more diverse and inclusive and expansive over time. Might take a lot of time, but I do hope that it happens.
I really hope so. Yeah.
Because I have like, okay, I don't know about you, but I feel like you like different cultures, I don't know, different cultures they have like certain writing styles or themes are present. I read a couple of books by Japanese authors, and this is what immediately came to mind. I read, I think, 4 books by Japanese authors that were translated into English. And it could be like the language being translated, because each language has its own nuance. It could also be like the culture or writing style. I've never been to Japan, don't know a whole lot about Japan outside of those books I've read. But I can see a similarity in the writing style in those books, or in the characters' emotional expression. And in the themes that those books cover, a lot of those books covered themes of like female loneliness, or of feeling the pressure to perform in a society that is hyper functional, and where a lot of people around you are very successful in the traditional kind of monetary sense. There was also like kind of, and the books were very different. They were not similar books at all, right? So for example, one that comes to mind is like Convenience Store Woman. Another one that comes to mind is, I recently read Breasts and Eggs, late last year. And then, so like some of these books, I just felt that I felt that they reminded me of each other in a way. You know what I mean? Whereas they might not address the same topics, they might not have similar characters, but they reminded me of each other. And I think that the way that you and I are easily able to identify themes that we think we see repeatedly in Pakistani stories, I find that that might also be the case like in different cultures. I haven't read enough to say like, oh, Chinese books are like this, or Chinese culture is shown in this way through literature. You know, like I don't have a whole bunch of those examples, but I definitely felt it with some of the Japanese books I read. Have you felt similar with like authors of different cultures?
So basically, I haven't, firstly, a convenience store woman has been on my list of books to read for
Oh,
so
you should read
long.
it.
The thing is, like, I can't really tell if the stories are representing the right.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't tell. And then if it's coming out of Japan, we will just take it at face value that this is what it's like, because this is what we're reading about it. So I feel like, but at some level, I still feel like they're not writing about, because if you're Japanese, you could easily just go down the rabbit hole and talk about like just the war and nuclear bombs, and you can just talk about that part of the history, and that's just what you expect from stereotypical Japanese writers. But those are not the stories that we read, right? Like, I've read Kitchen by, I think, Banana Yoshimoto, if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't read that many. And I read like a Japanese thriller which I bought in Japan, and again, like, it's kind of, there's a disconnect in translated books where you can tell it's translated. But like, I remember Kitchen was about a woman whose grandmother passes away, and it's just like she's grieving, and it was kind of about a woman who is going through something. And that's an experience that's universal, that everybody kind of like mourns the death of a grandparent. And it didn't really matter if the book was Japanese or not, because writing kind of made me think of like all the grief that my family has experienced after the death of my grandmother. So it's kind of like, it didn't really need, like, it was kind of doing its job, so to say, that it was making you feel things. Like, you kind of get a little bit of that sterility. There's a difference in writing that you can definitely feel that this is in Japanese, or more so in Korean books, right? Like South Korean books. But
I haven't read.
Well, I've read a few. But no, the point is that, like, I don't think, like, I think we are able to pick out like our books are stereotypical and other people might not be. But I still feel like, I kind of think that we've gotten stuck in this thing where we're just writing about a few things. But at the same time, like, I've gotten on my videos comments like, oh, Turkish writers are just so obsessed with one particular theme, like they need to expand because they kind of can relate to what I'm saying about Pakistani books. So I think there's like different ways of looking at it, that like, it's
like, who is your book for? Like, who is your audience? Is the audience, are you writing for a Pakistani audience? Because sometimes it feels like, in my opinion, that Pakistani books are not written for Pakistani audiences.
Or an audience which is like, do you really need to write dupatta, scarf, and naan bread and all these things?
Chai tea is my favorite. But I also, I think there's real value to your point about, are we able to connect to the experience on a human level, or is it only this particular experience that this particular country, or I totally understand that. Like there's so many great books, or I think maybe the books I've read that are the absolute like biggest emotional impact situations I've been in are there because I connect with the experience that the character is having on some human level, even though I might not be anything like that character. And yeah, I agree that relatability on a human level is maybe like the golden ticket or something,
Kind of what makes you like relate to human experience. So right now I'm reading a book called The Service, which is basically about sex workers, and it's set in the UK, and it's about like two of these sex workers and a journalist like ending their their industry and kind of like going
Mm.
after them. And then you kind of think that, oh, this is going to be one of those stories, but like you start empathizing with the people who are in this industry. And I've talked about this book so much that my husband's like, I will also read it just to see the fascination. And yeah, he's like halfway through it, and like we had a discussion about like what we think about this, right? Like if you interact a person, if you come across a person who is in this line of work, like how would you treat them? Like would you treat them like a
Yeah.
normal human being, or would you have like certain kinds of reservations? And again, that's because like the book humanized like a part of life that we don't have any connectivity to. We don't really think about it
Yeah.
beyond what's been drilled into our brain since we were children. Like it kind of loses
Mm.
the human element of it, right? Like they're just like quote unquote bad women. But then you kind of start to read a book that's like really well written and kind of humanizes them,
Mm.
talks about their struggles and the fact that they're
Yeah.
criminalized. And people would say that why aren't they doing normal work? Like they can find a job. But this woman was criminalized, like her records on like police has a record, and then if she goes to work there's a background check and there's no finding a normal
Mm.
job. It's kind of one of those things that there's no getting out of. So that book made us like made it seem like we're actually talking about women who are human beings,
Yeah.
and they fell into this line of work for whatever reason, and they can't seem to get out of it for whatever reason, right? So like
Mm.
you wouldn't really think of them as human beings if you read it in any other book, because it would just emphasize on one aspect of them and not really look at them as people. But then in this
Mhm.
particular book we're seeing like the mental health struggles and what they're going through when they have children and they have families, and like it's a very very humanistic element. And it's, I think that's what makes it such a good book, because you're able to see beyond the stories and you're not really seeing what these women are doing with themselves or with their bodies, or
Yeah.
they're getting paid for certain things, but it's also like you start to see them as people. And
Mhm.
this is what the experience should be, right? Like we're currently reading a book about, we can't relate to it at all, but at the same time we're looking at these human beings and people who would probably have like similar experiences.
Yeah.
I think that's again, like you said, the winning ticket, that it's like empathizing with the people even though like you might not have anything to do with them or that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think okay, so I have an interesting question now. Sorry to put you on the spot. But since we're talking about like the importance of connecting with characters, do you have like in your head, like, I don't know, characters that you've really connected to, or that you felt that the author did such a good job with that character in some book that you read, even if you don't directly relate to that character, but like they left a really lasting impression on you?
I mean, there's definitely been books. Like I can't pinpoint one character, because every time I read a certain book, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something I would say or something I would do.
Hmm.
There's definitely books that make you think and make you emotional and kind of. I remember when the most emotional book reading experience I had was reading Cracking India or Ice Candy Man by Babsi Sidhwa, which first one that kind of comes to mind. Again, because it's so humanized, and then you kind of, when you live in Pakistan and like partition is glossed over in our education, and they talk about like all these meetings and objective resolution and the Jinnah Gandhi talks and the trains, but like we're missing the human element from it.
Yeah.
The partition kind of like, I think those books humanize the partition for me, because we're actually talking about people, we're not talking about numbers.
Yeah.
So many. So I guess like I get, there's not a single book that comes to mind where I'm like, oh, I'm this character. Like sometimes when I'm reading Pride and Prejudice, I'm like, I'm Mr. Darcy, and other times I'm like, no, I'm actually a Lizzie. There's no way that I'm Darcy. Things like that. But there hasn't been a particular book that I've like, this is my holy grail. Like it hasn't.
Oh yeah.
Nothing comes to
No,
mind.
I don't know if I have a character that's like, oh, I'm exactly like that character, but I definitely like, I have a couple characters in mind where I feel the author did such a good job that I feel like I know this character. Like if they materialized, I know their story. I understand them, you know, made them very real to me. I recently read a book called Furia, which is, I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's by an Argentinian author, and it's about a girl who is an aspiring football player.
Right.
And she lives in Argentina, and it's not encouraged for her. It's not a traditional female role for her to be a football player. She's expected to be the wife or girlfriend of a football player. Like, you know, that's considered the best she could possibly do, because then she'll have access to money. She's from an underprivileged community, that kind of thing. And the author did such a good job of not only sharing this girl's like, and it's a younger girl, so even the writing style was so well suited to that like young woman trying to find herself, right? Like she really likes this boy. He is a famous footballer. She could be his girlfriend, and she could easily go into that role of just following him around the world as he competes in different competitions. But then her own ambition to be a footballer, and how she finds kindness for herself. This is the part where I think the author did such a good job. The little girl not only finds not only is she going through her own struggles, but because of her struggles, she's able to recognize in her mother what she previously hadn't seen, like her mother's strengths, her mother's weaknesses, her mother's challenges with her own father and the unhappy relationship that they have. And then she's also able to take what she's learning from that situation and go to a shelter for people who are even more underprivileged than she is. And like she interacts with the young women there that she sees are interested in reading books, and like she tries to help them. I feel that the author did such a good job of kind of showing us all the aspects of that character. That like, look at me, here I am talking about this character for like 5 minutes, and I haven't told you anything about the main plot, right? Like what actually happens. And so I love characters where the author does such a good job of fleshing them out that I feel that they could be on a TV show. Like I have seen them on a TV show, or they could be walking down the street and I would know their story, right?
Yeah.
And that's what really excites me. I hope there's more of that in everything I read, but also like in Pakistani books. I hope there's a lot more of that.
For sure, because like I can understand, like I think I've seen this book on script. Like I've definitely seen an audiobook for it. And I really like the fact that I now have, this is completely just a different point by the way, it's really random, but so many like things that we're reading which are not by traditionally American white, like we're just reading more diverse.
Dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reading more diverse stories. So that's a really good point, like about just the, now that we have more access to books like that, but again about a certain character who you are not like a 16-year-old Argentinian who's into
Yeah.
football, right?
I don't care about football. but her enthusiasm for the sport, I was like, yes, football is so exciting.
Yes, I want you to win. Like I think that's the beauty of it. Like the fact that you can kind of, you can't even relate to it, but you can understand the hopes and the dreams of a 16-year-old. In a way that you can kind of empathize with them, and you're rooting for them throughout the story, and it's all like something that you're really enjoying. Yeah, so basically we've been talking for an hour and 12 minutes, and I don't know how long this video would be, but I think we're going to start wrapping it up. So I feel
Yeah.
like this video is going to have a bit of an abrupt ending, because this has been a long conversation, but we will kind of try to wrap it up, and I'll have Zainab on here again so we can continue talking about books. And I just want to ask you one thing, that what is like one of your favorite books that you would like to recommend?
I think it's a book that is a real reading experience because the author very powerfully connects us to characters and emotions. It's called A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And I recommend that you absolutely read it, but please go into it with a big trigger warning, caution warning. It will rip your heart out and absolutely destroy you. But the book, I can't possibly not recommend it because the author has done such a phenomenal job of connecting you to the characters. And that's what we've been talking about today. So I feel like it's very on trend with what we're discussing. But yeah, couldn't recommend it enough.
That's one of those books that I'm scared to go near, because I've seen people reading it, and I've seen like reading blogs of people just reading it and then just like completely breaking down and crying. And
Yeah, I did too.
and yeah, it's just one of those books that like, it's firstly like I'm intimidated by it because it's a brick. It's like 7 or 8 pages. It's a huge book, and every video that I've seen someone talking about it, like they end up crying, and I was like, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that.
Yeah.
That level of like emotional, I don't know, like sad books are make you sad and then that sadness stays with you for some time. But yeah, thank you for recommending it because I feel like that makes me feel a little more brave. I can go near it, and so it might be like an emotional experience. It's one that like I kind of need to have, especially like I think it's kind of also considered a modern classic, right? Like everybody's
Hmm.
reading it, and I think Hanya Yanagihara just came out with a new book that
Yeah,
everyone who's read A Little Life is really really excited about, and they're like we're ready to cry, and it's like, I'm not sure if I'm
that's me.
ready.
That's me. I'm really excited about the new book. It's what I'm currently reading. But yeah, give it a go. It is, I will say that I read it very slowly because there were many times where I had to close it. I couldn't take it anymore and I needed to disconnect. So yes, but I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely give it a go. I'm still like scared of it because I'm just the number of people that I've seen like really really cry, not just like shedding a tear, right? Like not just a tear here, a tear there, but like breaking down and just like bawling their eyes out, and I'm like, that's going to be a fun experience. So yeah, I'll definitely give it a go. But thank you so much for talking to me. And just like I just messaged you on Instagram, I was like, hey, if you're
No, thank you for having me. This was fun.
yeah, it was definitely fun. So Zainab will be back on the channel, and we'll see you guys all soon.